we ready to go? Oh, here we are. Okay, welcome everyone to our June 13th, 2023 Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District Board meeting. And our first item is to call this meeting to order and have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Next item is to approve the agenda. If there's any additions, corrections, or deletions, is there anything from staff on the agenda? Nothing from staff? Anything from board members? Any additions? Okay, I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
It's moved by Manager Tofinelli, seconded by Manager Boyles. Any discussion? No discussion, I don't think. So all approval, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same side. Motion carried 5-0. Okay, so we're going to move right into our programs and project update from staff. And take it away, staff.
All right, so it's been a busy month. Our lake levels, due to lack of rain, are now dropping, unfortunately. Nobody was really ready to hear that in June. So Prior Lake's at 901. Spring Lake Logger is still out there. It's in Colorado. It's getting fixed, but we recognize that that is a need that we are currently working on. Fish Lake is at 943.85, which is average. That's at the outlet weir level. Pike Lake is at 819.95. It's low. It's not receiving water from Prior Lake, which it normally would be. Since May 1st, we've only received 1.71 inches. This is the cause of our declining lake levels. This month, we continued with our bluegill stocking program, partnering with the Spring Lake Association. We stocked hybrid bluegill to prey on carp eggs in the Geis wetland, where 2,400 bluegill were, and in the desilt pond, 1,200 bluegill. So at the current time, there is spawning carp in desilt pond, and we are excited that these carp are going to be, or these bluegills will be put to really good use. So big thanks to Spring Lake Association for providing funds and continue to work on management in the Spring Lake system. So in this past month, we've been busy backpack and boat electrofishing, where over 3,600 pounds have been removed. In the primarily Mud Bay, the Arctic Lake Channel, we caught a good spawning run of carp exiting Arctic Lake and looking to head into Prior Lake, as well as the Spring Lake Channel and up Spring Lake towards County Ditch 13. Many observations are coming in through carp espionage, where we use those, as well as observations of spawning behavior in the lake. I just want to highlight that this is something that we actually like to see. This is telling us that our programs and efforts are working. It's not ideal for them to spawn in lake, where there are more predators to eat their eggs that they lay. So we're making good progress. In May, we treated for curly-leaf pondweed in Spring Lake. Approximately 7.27 acres were treated in both these southern lobes. In Lower Pryor and Upper Pryor Lake, we received a non-recommendation based on curly leaf pondweed delineations and lack thereof of projected curly leaf pondweed growth. Same with Fish Lake. Sort of an unusual year when it comes to curly leaf pondweed treatments. The thought is that this late winter deep snowpack really impacted and delayed curly leaf pondweed growth. Our boat inspections have started on Spring, Lower, and Upper Pryor Lakes. The boat inspectors are out primarily supplementing the DNR on the weekends, and our easement inspections have occurred. That work is being transitioned and aided with the SWCD, and our interns are really helping that out, checking compliance and updating files. So, in addition to some of these highlights, we've had ferric chloride delivery. That went smoothly. We've been surveying district lakes using Biobase. We've been out with interns of digging up wild parsley in the Pelock, and maintaining equipment and loggers and doing additional work on the boat. So really quite the busy spring for us.
Okay, I'll jump right into projects here. Here's the handy dandy list of some things we've got going on, and I'll talk about the 3 red ones today. Really briefly, to just start in general, give you an update on, there are several projects that I've been talking to landowners without any concrete updates to have, but I wanted to mention the flood storage project 5 we met about and was discussed because it wasn't originally an identified storage project. Conversations are being had with related landowners. That is ongoing, but there's nothing to report back yet. So I didn't want to ignore that project. Things are going, but nothing to say concrete yet. So to talk about Sutton Lake, Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, Swamp, and the pipelining, which you've heard a little bit about already as well. This here on the left is just a picture of an Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, but the map on the right is really what I want to focus on to tell this story. You can see there's a little document icon that's meant to symbolize a feasibility study. We conducted a feasibility study on an iron enhanced sand filter in this location. That's water coming out of Sutton Lake, going into County Ditch 13. Then I've put some arrows that track the direction of flow from County Ditch 13 in that area. And the reason I've done this is because working with the landowner where the feasibility study has been done, there's additional considerations that we would need to address in order to move forward with that site. It's we're still working with that landowner, but one of the directions we were given is please consider other options and make sure this is the best, most common sense option for the district, and that's motivating to the landowner. So then it asks the question of these 2 orange question marks on the map. You can see with the direction of flow that leftmost question mark, yeah, there's another branch of County Ditch 13. So in theory, you would gather more water, treat, and it could have additional water quality benefits to have a location there. If you go further downstream following the arrows, farthest right question mark, again, gathers another branch of County Ditch 13. So this is some work that we're doing right now that is really illustrating the benefit of our monitoring data. We have flow data that's going to inform this. We have phosphorus data we collect. And we're working with Carl to understand with the site constraints What is the water quality benefit that could be gained at these different sites if we have to look elsewhere? What's the cost estimated? With more water, you need a bigger size iron enhanced sand filter. It's likely that we'll need a settling basin at those two question mark sites, I'll say, and also an unknown with landowner willingness as well. But we're kind of in initial stages of looking at the cost benefit analysis, and this is something that our monitoring will really help us make an educated decision of even worth talking to the landowner. Is this project not cost efficient? Go ahead.
Emily, I think it would be great if we could get more water treated. I think Charles always mentioned to me a certain amount of grade differential to make an iron enhanced. Are we checking that out as far as, is it feasible to go to these?
It is feasible with pumps.
Oh,
So,
well, there's always a way. Okay.
so that's part of the equation.
I didn't think of that. Yeah, there's pumps as well. Yep. Well,
So that'll be part of the cost benefit as well, and then we'll want to look at it holistically. Considering the site that does have the feasibility study done, it's likely that we would need to do some additional construction there to get that negotiation through. So likely some additional costs for that site that weren't originally identified in the feasibility study. So we'll be crunching those initial numbers, and it's just time to look at some options. So hopefully we'll get something good out of this corner and treat some water. And the next iron enhanced sand filter project we're working on this summer is coming out of Swamp Lake. That top camouflage looking map shows the floodplains, and Swamp Lake, I have learned since looking into this project, a complex watershed. Depending on the water level, it can drain two ways. Some initial landowner and agency meetings. This project, we're contracting with Stantec to do this work. Overall, we've had favorable feedback from agency and landowner and interest in seeing what this will shape into. The idea would be to treat water coming out of Swamp Lake, which is high in phosphorus. The initial concept is very rough, but based on the fact that there is continual flow right now with very little rain we've seen, they're recommending we do bioretention settling area to an iron enhanced sand filter, and that'll help with the efficiency of the iron enhanced sand filter, have the dry, wet cycles as well. Additionally, when we looked at this project, this is funded through Bowser Clean Water funding, focused on water quality, but as directed by the Board of Managers and our plan, another of our goals is flood reduction. Swamp Lake presents a natural place we could create additional flood storage. So that'll be something we're looking at. Are there outlet alterations that are an easy add-on for some flood storage benefit? So this is still very preliminary. One item that if we do pursue flood storage, that may require some additional work as we are looking into what floodplain data and modeling we have because of this draining. If we were to raise water level, we would likely need to have some floodplain information to justify what was going to happen with some alterations to the outlet structure. Just some initial where things are on this project. And then last, I'll just really quickly mention, since you've already heard, we'll be resubmitting a request for capital funding for $2 million for the pipelining along the Prior Lake outlet. And that would, if we were funded, that would likely mean construction is happening in winter 2024-25. And then today I also just wanted to circle back and give an update on education and outreach. I know at the last meeting, I believe, we had SWCD come and present on the Scott Clean Water Education Program. They did a really great job presenting the benefits of the program across all the municipalities, and I felt that, and it was asked by managers, what does it do for us in the district exactly? So I followed up with them, and they were able to provide numbers specific to the district. I think they're very compelling. So some to share, in 2022 alone, they reached 222 landowners, 89 of them entered into the project. 58 residents received technical assistance. And then that was all under what we provided them with $3,500. So pretty incredible reach there for a very low amount of money. They also created materials for us and distributed our materials that we created. That includes articles, things in the scene, handouts. They video a lot of their events and workshops that we're able to share and reuse. And I'm sure more because I wasn't here much of 2022. So, and then just that bottom part kind of totals the last 5 years' recent history, 102 projects and 2,200, almost 300 acres of conservation projects. So I think it's been a really effective partnership, and I wanted to present those numbers so you had some idea of what was occurring in our watershed district. This week, as an example, SWCD is hosting a shoreline restoration workshop, which is a huge asset. We'll be participating and really provides lakeshore owners a place where they can learn those technical skills. So just wanted to update on that. Any questions?
Any questions on the staff report?
Mr. Chair,
Boyles.
just a question. What do we call those people that squeal on carp?
Espionage.
The carp espionage.
Yes. Have we reviewed how you become an espionager? Or maybe you have and I didn't hear. Go ahead. We may as well enlist additional espionagers.
Manager Boyles, no, I don't have a number on how many espionagers are out there, but I can provide that information at the next meeting.
And there are no requirements.
I want to become an espionager. How do I do it? Do I just call you? Hey, I'm Frankie Espionager.
On our website, we have, under our carp management section, we have information about the carp espionage program and how to participate. It's very simple. You can look on a map, you place a pin on the map, it'll ask you questions, and that submission gets sent to the staff here. Very simple. We've shared this program with other organizations who've began using it, so really cool concept.
Carp families?
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
Joni, you have something to say?
Manager Loney, I just wanted to point out that we did miss the public comment section of our agenda, and just wanted to see if we may want to circle back to that.
Sorry about that. Let's see. You're right. You went right over that. Okay, so go back to the public comment section. Anybody here wish to make a comment to us? Not seeing or hearing any? Guess we're good. Okay. Are we done with the program update then? Okay. So we'll move on to Fish Lake Management Plan, project status update, and this is discussion only, and Pat Conrad is going to present. Welcome, Pat.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here, and thanks for coming and presenting. And also thank you for authorizing this work and letting us work on this project. It's a fun, exciting project. I think I'll just give a brief introduction. I think you guys are all familiar with this for this study. A couple past studies that have been done on the lake have grossly contradictory conclusions as to the issues surrounding the water quality on Fish Lake. Originally, a lake management plan was developed by you guys back in 2006, and the conclusion of that report was that by far the source of phosphorus within the water column for the lake, the problems with nutrient loading for the lake were all associated with internal loading. Okay, so that study was very conclusive, saying, yeah, absolutely, the problem here is internal loading, and we need to get internal loading under wraps. Since then, the state of Minnesota has gone through and done watershed TMDLs across the state of Minnesota, and as part of that process, they've designed some modeling and some different tools to come up with what the watershed loading dynamics are for various resources. And in the case of Fish Lake, that report said, well, we think that watershed loading is the primary driver of nutrient loading in this. And so as part of what we're doing is trying to determine which of those, which is the right way to look at this lake in terms of what that source is for the phosphorus. One of the things we've questioned in both of the studies is the accuracy of the data, how local it is, how kind of coarse is that information. Some of the information that the state had used was fairly coarse. They had identified feedlots with watershed, and so some additional work that was done by staff and others at SWCD have determined that some of that data wasn't quite accurate. So, long story short, we're updating a lot of that information. Again, just trying to get to the bottom of what's the condition of the lake, what are the sources that are driving the elevated phosphorus levels and algae blooms and that kind of thing within the lake. So tonight what I want to do is give you guys kind of an abbreviated version of a meeting that we put on end of May for a room full of stakeholders, maybe 20 local residents, kind of give them what we called a State of the Lake presentation, where we went through and basically gave them a lot of the background on how lakes work, what the context is, and then presented on the current conditions and that type of thing. And I'm just going to give you kind of a abbreviated version of that report, starting with kind of Limnology 101, which, and forgive me, I know a lot of you guys have been around and know a lot of this stuff, but I'll just kind of breeze through some of this. So, anytime we talk about lakes, streams, anything, we always start with watershed influence, and this is stuff that you guys are very, very familiar with. But in the case of lakes, the character of a lake is very much influenced by the character of its watershed. So the health of the watershed is directly attributed to the downstream water body. It's interesting in the case of Fish Lake, fairly common watershed characteristics that we see in kind of that suburban rural area. It's a mixture of agricultural uses, large lot, residential, that type of thing. But what's interesting for Fish Lake is that the ratio of the watershed to the lake itself is very, very small. It's on the order of maybe 2 to 1, watershed size to lake size. And really what we see is anything under 10 to 1 is typically associated with a good quality, so very small ratio. So that's kind of one of the drivers is that watershed, but equally important in the case of lakes is the dynamics that take place within the lake. So how, we can think of lakes acting as somewhat of a bathtub, right? Anything that comes down into that lake kind of sits in that lake. So any watershed loading that comes down out of the watershed, that silty, dirty, polluted water that comes off of the watershed surfaces, and it comes into the lake and kind of gets deposited. And so there's many within the lake that can allow that to be resuspended back up into the water for use by algae and plant growth. So wind and boat action, bottom feeding fish if we have carp, and then sediment can also release phosphorus. So a really important dynamic within Fish Lake is this concept of lake mixing. And again, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this concept, but what we get is we get that divide in water column. So in the summer, as that surface water heats up, we get a divide between that hot water on the top and the cold water on the bottom. In the fall, when that water cools off, we get overturning, and then we get another divide in the winter and another resuspension again in the spring. And what's important about this is that when those bottom sediments lose oxygen, that's when they're ripe to allow phosphorus to be released from those sediments. So what we're seeing in Fish Lake, the evidence points to kind of when this spring turnover occurs, we're getting a flux of nutrients coming up out of those bottom sediments and available for plant and algae growth. And we saw that this summer, or this spring in particular, with a very early bloom of algae in that lake that occurred, within days of ice out on that lake. So different from kind of the algae dynamics that we might be more familiar with of the dog days of summer, where maybe in August, when it's super hot, we get those green algae blooms. In this lake, we're getting more of a spring bloom associated with that phosphorus release out of the bottom sediments that happens as the lake begins to mix. All right. In terms of the context, I'm going to buzz through this again because this is stuff that is really basic to watershed managers. When we talk about lakes, we're talking about trophic states. So how fertile is that lake? And there's 3 key parameters that we use, and these are parameters that kind of set up the state standards. So we look at phosphorus being the limiting nutrient. In other words, this is the nutrient that if you add a little bit more, that's what the algae and the plants are waiting for, and they'll shoot up. And the reason we know that is because the picture on the far right there, a lake up in Canada, they put a boom across the lake. They added phosphorus. They put phosphorus in the one side of the lake and left the other untouched, and it bloomed and turned pea green, as you can see in this. So that's one of the key parameters. Transparency is another key parameter, and that's basically it's very, very basic, and it's just the measurement of how far down in the water can we see. If we're swimming, can we see our toes? That being an indication of how clean the water is. Very important in terms of the biology of a lake, because that's really what drives where we can have plant growth within the lake. Okay, the plants only grow to where the sunlight allows for penetration of that water column, and so it really determines kind of what the biological zones within the lake can be because of that transparency. And then finally, the last being algae, or being chlorophyll, which is a measure of algae. And so this is just, how it's just a measurement of the pigments within plant material that is in the lake. And again, just a measurement of how green the lake is. So we talk about this, we talk about it in terms of this trophic, Carlson's Trophic State Index, where we kind of put all 3 of these parameters on a sliding scale and kind of standardize them to a value, a 0 to 100 value for the Carlson Trophic State Index. But then you can also see where these other measurements lie on this scale. And then the dashed line is the Deep Lake standard for this ecoregion that we're in, the central hardwood. So the central hardwoods forest ecoregion of Minnesota, that's where the standard is, and so that's the standard for Fish Lake. So we'll get into it in a minute and show you kind of the context of where the lake lies on that scale. Then kind of putting this all together in terms of what it is we care about from a kind of a regulatory standpoint, beneficial use standpoint. The Clean Water Act establishes that states determine what are the beneficial uses of all their water resources. And then they also require those states to evaluate their water resources to see if they are meeting those designated uses, set up standards, that type of thing. And so in the case of Fish Lake, it's been assessed for 3 major uses. The first being aquatic recreation, determined to be not supporting, and that's for violations of 2 of those standards, the phosphorus and the chlorophyll. Then the next area, aquatic life, there's been insufficient data collected for this parameter to determine whether or not the lake is meeting that designated use. And then finally, aquatic consumption, it's also considered to be impaired for aquatic consumption due to mercury levels, but that's kind of a statewide issue. It's not a watershed issue. It's an air pollution issue that's being addressed by the state of Minnesota. So for what we're working on with the aquatic recreation use and that violation with those two parameters, that's kind of where we're at here with what we're trying to do in this management plan, determine where those sources are and what are the solutions for getting to that. So then as it comes to what is the condition of the lake, I'll really quickly go through some of the data that's been collected. Starting with fishery, the most recent survey was from 2019. And the news here is that it's good news, right? I mean, it's got a fairly healthy population of fish. It's got a healthy, good fish population. DNR makes a lot of nice comments in the lake about this being kind of a prized fishing destination in the area. Primarily managed for walleye, and it's a stocking lake for walleye, but also includes catchable populations of the bass, bluegill, and black crappie. One of the few lakes free of aquatic invasive species, knock on wood. Hopefully that continues. And then kind of a laundry list of other fish that have been, that turned up in that survey. But we do have, reports of carp being in the lake, but from what we hear and what we've been able to establish so far is that it's not in excessive amounts of carp that are really leading to a lot of bottom stirring in the lake. So we don't think carp are necessarily an issue in this lake as it comes to water quality. Next is
I'll just jump in there, Pat, to clarify. The second bullet there saying there's no aquatic invasive species came from a DNR study that didn't catch any, and the district does surveys on the carp and manages that. And as Pat mentioned, they're not detrimental currently to the ecology of the lake. So I just wanted to bridge those 2 points there.
That are, contradictory points there. Thank you. Yeah. And then macrophytes, so aquatic plants, obviously. The most recent survey being done in 2022, there was an overall inventory survey done, and then a specific curly leaf pondweed investigation that was done that Jeff mentioned earlier didn't warrant there being any treatment. There was only maybe one small spot that had any kind of significant growth. Otherwise, all the other areas where it was found was determined to be very small amounts of growth. But also good news here in that a lot of good native species growing in this lake. It appears to be a kind of a stable aquatic plant population. Past surveys from 2015, 18, and 20 kind of show that similar pattern of species, variety, diversity, and abundance. So kind of a good, also good, healthy plant community here. But one thing I did want to point out here is that plants are really only observed to grow to 6 or 7 feet in all of these reports. So typically in a good, clean, clear lake, that water level, plant growth should be down to about 15 feet. So the water quality and the clarity in this lake is kind of affecting how deep those plants can grow. Next is the algae community. Again, I mentioned that we had that bloom early on here in 2023 that we had investigated. We were kind of concerned, wanted to, take the opportunity to dig into that and figure out what was going on with that. And so we did that investigation. Staff went out and took a sample, and we had it analyzed, and it was determined to be this diatom, which is it's kind of a reddish brown color bloom. It's common with this time blooms that I mentioned earlier, where we get that flux of nutrients coming out of the bottom sediments and allowing that species to kind of take off. Other species that were found during that survey, but were in low numbers, which we would expect for that time of year, were a common green algae and then a common blue-green algae. And we are going to do some additional thing later this summer to kind of keep an eye on and watch out for blue-green algae, because we're kind of concerned with the proliferation of blue-green algae that have been seen around the metro area, and kind of want to see what happens in this lake. So that's some information we'll probably be coming back to you to present later on. So looking at water quality on the lake, what current conditions are, you know, it's not that far off of what those state standards are, right? So it's a little bit high, a little bit above, and you can see here in the comparison of the long-term or the longer-term record, and then the most recent 5 years, and you can see in a lot of cases those values are cleaning up over the last few years. So with this lake, you know, we don't think it's that far out of whack that it needs really massive corrections, but we do think that with appropriate management activities, we can get the lake to meet state standards. One thing I did want to talk about here at the end of this section is kind of, you know, what I led off with was, you know, where's the problem coming from? Is it internal loading? Is it watershed loading? And we want to talk about some of the data points that we're collecting and some of the things that we're looking at to kind of give us that weight of evidence of what we think is the more appropriate source, ergo the more appropriate management activities to undergo. One of the things I wanted to note here is those lake bottom sediment measurements, or the lake bottom water measurements of phosphorus. And you can see, again, on that dashed line at the bottom, that is the state standard for the lake itself, right? And so you can see how elevated those concentrations of phosphorus are in those bottom pore water. So really high phosphorus concentrations down there at the bottom. Moving on to the next here, we wanted to talk about is in comparison to the average phosphorus concentrations within the lake and how they vary throughout the year, how the concentrations vary in the inflow water. We have a monitoring station that Jeff operates at one of the inlets coming into the lake, so we have concentrations of phosphorus from that inflow. And so you can see they're not telling the same story, right? They're kind of opposite of one another, and just kind of a real cursory, you know, kind of giving an eye check of when do we have high concentrations at the lake doesn't really up with when we have high concentrations coming in. So again, just another data point of kind of helping us determine what that appropriate source is to attack in the case of managing this lake. So just kind of wrap up here, the fish lake water quality. Key findings are we have a healthy fish, aquatic plant, and zooplankton community, and I didn't get into zooplankton during this presentation, but we have some evidence that suggests that there's a healthy zooplankton community in some of the data sets that we've looked at. Again, the 3 key parameters, we have exceedance of those 2 standards, but again, it's very near that standard and potentially has been improving in recent years. We have the early and late season blooms that are really tied or match up with those with that concept of the overturn and the elevated phosphorus concentrations coming up out of the bottom sediments. Right, and so, you know, right at this point, we're still doing some digging and still trying to wrap up some things, but right now our evidence points to it being more likely that those internal loading dynamics are what's at play here in this lake. So that's kind of the overview of our State of the Lake presentation and the watershed assessment work that we've done to date. We also wanted to do, as part of the watershed or lake management plan, we want to establish some goals and objectives for the lake, and so we wanted to just kind of run through these goals with you guys. These goal statements were developed based on the previous plan, some updated information that we've collected, and then we workshopped them with the residents at the recent meeting. So I'll just kind of go through these really quickly. And the fisheries goals are to maintain healthy, edible game fish population with management emphasis on walleye, mindful of the mercury contamination issue. And then to manage carp and other species that may contribute to bottom sediment release of nutrients. The aquatic macrophyte goals are to maintain healthy population of diverse native aquatic macrophytes, manage infestation of curly-leaf pondweed to below 4 acres total, and then residents at the meeting made the statement that they thought it was important to include some mention of the fact that their preference is for mechanical versus chemical treatment methods when it comes to managing curly-leaf pondweed infestations. And then finally on this slide, the phytoplankton algae goal is to reduce the frequency and severity of early and late season algae blooms, and then ensure that blue-green algae blooms do not become a health concern for recreational users. Then finally, on to the water quality goals. And, you know, the water quality goals are kind of, we're just reflecting what the state standards are here. And that is to meet the state standards for deep lakes, at the phosphorus, Secchi depth, and chlorophyll measurements. And then 2 goals for the 2 main sources. So reduce watershed phosphorus loading and control internal recycling of phosphorus. So with that, I'll wrap up here and let you know that we are in the very final stages of the modeling and data analysis for the lake. We went out and collected some soil samples throughout the watershed to get phosphorus measurements on the sediments, with the theory being kind of we needed to kind of double check what those watershed loads might be coming off the watershed, and double check to make sure that this watershed isn't hotter than the model would predict. The model uses basic assumptions. We wanted to kind of double check the specifics from this watershed, so we're still analyzing that data, just came back last week. And then as we proceed through the next steps, that will be to develop management recommendations for addressing the sources of phosphorus for the lake. And then we'll be coming back to the landowners for another meeting for their feedback. And then we've got, you know, the score of input meetings with you guys, update meetings that Emily has updated you on in the past. So that is what I had for you tonight. I apologize if that went long, but I'll stop here and see if you have any questions.
Okay, very good. Any questions for our consultant on the, Manager Morkenberg has a question.
Yes, thank you very much for your review. I guess one question I had is you talked about that most likely it's internal loading that's the main issue, which I assume is because you did the lake bottom phosphorus measurements that showed like the high levels in the lake bottom. And you talked about the circulation there. But my question is, did you assess the external loading, like in the streams and the phosphorus concentrations there? And did you calculate on that so that were you able to say that that is not as significant? Or?
Sure. Let me do that. So what we did is we built a model of the watershed, essentially saying, okay, here the watershed characteristics of the watershed are such. There's some impervious surfaces, there's some ag land, there's some residential areas, there's some wetlands. These are the types of land use we have in this watershed, and how much acreage of each of those land uses we have. We know what the kind of pollution fingerprint is of each of those land use types, land cover types. Some produce more water, some produce dirtier water, that type of thing. We know that general assumptions about those different land types. We built the model, calibrated that model to the concentrations that are in the lake. We used then release rates from the sediment in the lake as another input, and that's some information that we got from a study that was done in 2013 on the lake by the Science Museum. So we had good there. So then it's just all a matter of kind of calibrating and tweaking the model. We do have watershed monitoring data from a stream that comes into the lake, and we're able to take the concentrations of flows that are calculated for that monitoring station and compare that to our model and say, okay, does our model, our generalized model of what these land uses are like, does that jive with what we're seeing in this actual tributary coming in from Jeff's data? And that's the step that we're working on right now. And then again, like I mentioned, those sediment samples that we took and those soil samples that were taken. So when our model says, okay, this is how dirty cornfield is and this is how dirty a residential on is we have tests now in those spots to say, okay, is that consistent with what the model is saying? Is this matching what the model, predicts or thinks? So we're trying to truth it, if you will, ground truth it with real data from our real watershed to what the model thinks.
So those calculations and comparisons you will be presenting at a later date, is that correct?
That's what we're basically finalizing our model on right now.
Yeah. If we could just ask one other question is so we have the Fish Lake report here, and it says from 2021, it says a total phosphorus of 32, and I don't know if that's correct or not, because that obviously would be meeting the goals for total phosphorus.
Right, absolutely. And it's important to understand that when we talk about a lake not meeting its standard, it's across a period of time. It's about a 10-year average. So when the state says, is this lake impaired, is it not impaired, they're looking at a rolling average of 10 years.
But did you indicate that the overall trend is that it's actually gradually improving, possibly?
I say that with an asterisk in my voice because, that data varies so much from year to year. We didn't run any, statistical analysis to say it's a valid trend, if you will. We just are looking at the data and saying it's a little better. It seems to be a little better lately than it. But it doesn't pass any statistical analysis.
Any other questions from managers? Manager Topanelli.
One of the charts you showed seemed, if I understood correctly, that the watershed input exceeded state limits coming into the lake. There was one with the bottom and whatever.
With the one with the bar.
The scatter diagram, I guess you might call it.
Okay.
Keep going. This one right here. That was the lake bottom measurement, but I thought you also had one that showed the input stream.
So the next slide just kind of shows
Yes.
concentrations across the months within the lake, and then the concentrations of the watershed
inflow. And
inflow. Yep.
if I understood that, flow was exceeding the state number. Am I reading that?
That's a little bit comparing apples and oranges. It's the same, concentration number, but the standard, the standard that's established, that 40, represents an in-lake concentration of 40. And that's the standard because that's the level of phosphorus that corresponds to the algae growth, the plant growth, kind of the green, the reduced transparency, all of that kind of stuff. The concentration of phosphorus on its own isn't a problem. It's how it's expressed. It's expressed in that growth of algae, that greening up of the water, that smelliness of water, people not wanting to swim in the water. That's the standard really that's being assessed against is can we swim in it? And that 40 concentration of phosphorus is, again, it's just if you look at those three key parameters, that's what matches up with that high levels of algae, that green and transparency that people aren't going to want to use it for that recreational use. Does that make sense?
No, not totally, but
Okay.
that may have to do with intelligence and not your presentation, so let's be fair.
Maybe Kyle can explain it better.
I don't know if I can explain it better, but, think about it this way. You have a really large bathtub, and all the inputs are being diluted in that overall mixing basin. The graphs on is one smaller watershed discharge point. It's not the only source of water to the lake. So while they are higher values, roughly 200, 250, or 150 to 250, that's getting diluted in the overall basin. So this is higher than the overall lake concentration, but it's being diluted. If you go back one slide, those concentrations are an order of magnitude or two greater. You've got ranges, you see a lot of them above 200, 600, some of them up into the 8,000 range. So that's a lot more significant in terms of, and that's in-lake concentration. So it's diluted.
It's not uncommon for us to see higher concentrations of phosphorus coming into the lake than are actually in the lake.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand. It's been my understanding that once phosphorus gets in, we don't really take it out.
Well, we don't,
Goes into
right?
the sediment,
It settles down into
settles
that
down and goes in, and
that sediment. Yep, and so it's not in that it's not in that upper water column where we have our biological growth. It's settled down into the bottom sediments.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to do a follow-up question on that chart then. Were there actual measurements of the lake bottom? Is that how you got these numbers? Or?
These numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah, these numbers come from the lake monitoring. When they do the lake monitoring, what they'll do is they'll take a surface sample. A lot of times then they'll take a sample every meter down and get a profile, but then they also take one that's considered a bottom measurement, and it's maybe, a meter off the bottom or as close to the bottom as they can get without starting to stir up muck.
There's some pretty high numbers there when you look
Yeah.
at it. So I assume next time you see your report, you're going to have some recommendations on how to deal with the internal loading and
Correct.
external loading.
Correct.
Any other questions?
To the same graph, so I'm looking at it, and you can see there's some pretty high numbers, but there are also some quite low numbers. So typically, if you look at, say, 2020, and you look at the skewness of it and take a median of it, it actually falls in that purple, which is not goal or whatever it is. So the question is, when you see it scattered like this, and you measure it in lakes, typically, now, how do we know that it's high or low, or how do you assess that?
So what we're showing is all the measurements that were taken in 2020 are lining up like this. And so without seeing the dates on this, it's my assumption that those highest levels are when we're having those sediments that have gone anoxic and are no oxygen, so they're allowing for that phosphorus release to come out of the sediments. And the good values that we have are times when we have good oxygen levels down in the water bottom.
So these are measured throughout the year. It's
Correct.
not one measurement in many places. It's
Correct.
throughout the year.
Yep, correct.
And it's also a little unusual when you look at one of the other graphs that for Fish Lake, that this one here, that you can see April, May is relatively high, and October is relatively high. Which surprised me is that the total phosphorus is low in the lake in the warm summer months.
Yep.
Is that normal, or that's unusual to me?
Exactly. That's exactly the point. With this, that's why I was trying to make the point that this lake acts a little different than the lakes that we're used to seeing, right? I mean, we're used to getting really dirty green water in August and September, really hot days of being the most eutrophic part of the season, and that's not the case that's happening here. And again, that's an indication to us that it's the driver is that internal loading and the mixing that is occurring. Those sediments, those bottom sediments go anoxic. They go anoxic in the winter. You're getting all that plant material that goes down there and dies, and you're not getting mixing with, there's ice on the water, there's ice on the top, so we're not getting wind circulation. No new oxygen is getting down to that bottom sediment. Those plants are decaying, eating up the oxygen, and then when springtime comes, it's allowed to release out of there, and that's when we're getting those high values, those high levels.
Manager Tofinelli.
So is it my understanding that with low oxygen levels, the sediment gives up the phosphorus becomes chemically unbonded.
Exactly.
And then when oxygen comes back, I'm just curious, kind of a curiosity question, does the phosphorus rebond with the sediment? Is that the kind of interaction you have going on?
Exactly. Yeah. And so again, in summer, we're getting that same kind of concept where they're divided. You have that water that's super hot on the surface. You got a little bit of a mixing zone. You know this from swimming in the lake, that water that's on the bottom is super cold. Well, then they're physically detached from one another. There's a barrier there that's not allowing any of that rich oxygenated water from the surface to getting down to those bottom sediments, and again allowing them to go oxygen poor and allowing for that release of phosphorus. But those bonds that are, that phosphorus is being tied to iron and other molecules down in the elements down in the soil. That bond is being broken.
If we did a Gulf Stream type effect and circulated the water, we wouldn't have this problem.
If you had a
Tongue-in-cheek.
micro doser of air bubbles down there, that would help too. That's the kind of solutions that, people look at this all across the world, are looking for solutions to the dairy problem. This isn't unique to the Midwest or, Fish Lake, obviously. It goes on all over the world, and people have been scratching their heads over how to fix these problems for years.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very,
Yeah, thank you for your questions.
Very
It was a
good.
good conversation. I appreciate it.
Okay. Manager Morkenberg has one more question.
Yes, when you do a report, it would also be good to discuss a little bit more in detail the lake size and shape and depth, and in relationship to that also the impact of wind and also the boat wave action. Our citizen advisory committee just advised us to look at things like boat wave action on the lake, as opposed to, relationship to the distance to the shore, as well as the depth of the lake where this wave action takes place.
Yep.
So it would be good if you could also give a report on that.
Yep, absolutely. Coincidentally, I had dinner over here in town, and the gentleman at the bar next to me were talking about waves on Prior Lake and all the problems that causes at the lake. So it's a very very popular issue around here, right?
Okay, I think.
Thank you.
Good presentation. Thank you. We'll look forward for another one. And really, it's only a couple months away or 3 months away. So it's not that far. Okay. We're going to move on here. We need to look at Resolution 370, revising the name of the Upper Watershed Blueprint Reserve Fund. And District Administrator Joni Giese, I believe, has this one.
President Loney and managers, in 2021, the district established the Upper Watershed Blueprint Reserve Fund as an outcome primarily of recently completed Upper Watershed Blueprint project. And at that time, several priority projects had been selected from the blueprint for the district. That was their goal, to make those kind of priority projects for implementation. In reality, the real goal with this fund was to really improve water quality and flood reduction in the upper watershed. Subsequent to 2021, we did renew the fund and put additional funds in it in 2022. But we also learned that some of these initial priority projects that we had selected are going to take a while to actually implement. It's a complicated process to get some of these projects built. At the same time, we've also had other projects come up, water quality or flood reduction projects come to our attention that actually could be implemented sooner rather than later in the upper watershed, so that were not originally on our radar. So the intent of this resolution is to clarify that the role of the fund is for projects that improve water quality and reduce flooding in the upper watershed, and to define upper watershed as those areas that contribute drainage to Spring Lake and Prior Lake. So with that, staff recommends that the Board of Managers make a motion to approve Resolution 23-370, revising the name of the Upper Watershed Blueprint Reserve Fund to just the Upper Watershed Reserve Fund. Word blueprint.
Okay, very good, Joe. Is there a motion
So moved.
to approve, a motion by Manager Boyles to approve Resolution 23-370?
Second?
Second by Manager Burnett. Is there any discussion from any managers here on that? I would just like to add a comment that basically what we're doing is combining our water quality and our water storage projects into one reserve fund. Before, we had just kind of quality funds, so we're using the fund for all projects in the upper watershed, whether they're storage or water quality, correct?
Correct.
Okay, any more discussion? Not here seeing any. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Okay, now we're going to go to office space release renewal.
All right, President Loney and managers. In 2021, the district entered into a one-year lease with the city of Prior Lake for the rental of office space. Lease terms allow for a renewal on an annual basis for up to 4 additional years, with each renewal year including a 3% increase in rent. Recently, I had a meeting with the city manager and discussed several office improvements associated with the district office. And the city has committed to providing or space to identify our office as the watershed district. We have also discussed some information technology improvements in the conference room and the Wagon Bridge conference room that the city has agreed to work with us to make those technology improvements. We did discuss the possibility of doing technology improvements here in the council chambers, but that was one item that the city is not willing to make that additional commitment for. But with that, we feel that it's a good relationship, that we're working together. It's a nice work environment for our staff. And so we would recommend that a motion be made to approve the office space lease renewal with the city of Prior Lake for a one-year period effective July 1st, 2023.
Okay, anybody want to make that motion?
So moved.
Motion by Manager Boyle,
Second.
second by Manager Tofinelli. And I did do calculations, so in 2 years at 3%, we go from 2250 to 2387.03. Discussion on the motion? Not seeing any or hearing any. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Okay, the next item we have is I want to make sure I'm on the right, yes, City of Savage interim equivalency approach. Administrator Geesey, you have this one again.
President Loney and managers. In March, staff provided an update to the Board of Managers on establishing equivalency agreements with our LGU partners. At that time, conversations with the City of Savage indicated that Savage was intent on making their rules equivalent with the district's rules. But they were in the process of doing an ordinance update that may take up to for them to update the ordinances in order to make them equivalent with the district rules. At that time in March, we had a preliminary discussion about the possibility of Watershed District reestablishing a permit program within the City of Savage. So subsequent to our March meeting, district staff had a meeting with staff from the City of Savage, and we came up with basically an alternate interim approach. So instead of the district once again reinitiating permitting within the city, we came up with an approach that would outlined in a draft letter that was included in your packet. And the point that really should be made is that the City of Savage cannot enforce Prior Lake Spring rules. So in the interim, all they can do is enforce their own rules. They have no authority to enforce our rules. The only way that our rules can be enforced is if we establish a permit program within the city. But what we're proposing is that we do a kind of an interim approach, as I'll try to describe here, for just this time period before their ordinances are updated and without having us to implementing our own permit program. So essentially, the city's ordinances are already fairly similar to the district. There are just minor changes, minor differences between their existing ordinances and our new rules. And the city and the district are both MS4 communities, so we're already obligated by our general permit with the MPCA to already enforce some stormwater rules, base stormwater rules. Most of the City of Savage that is located within the boundaries of the district is already subdivided. There's one small area yet that is being developed, and that development is, we understand, is all going to be done through a process called a planned unit development process. And by using a planned unit development process, that provides more flexibility for city staff to make a conditional recommendations to that development that they do need as a development. The developer needs to implement the district's rules. So this gives us a little kind of workaround. So by using a planned unit development approach, they can require that the developers implement the rules. And once again, this is the primary area yet to be developed within the City of Savage. We really will, by using a PUD process and the city agreeing to make conditional approval of these developments based on them meeting our rules, we essentially are getting our rules met. Now, there may be parcels that come up within the City of Savage that are not a PUD process, and that is our risk. Those situations are the times when our rules could not be enforced. But we really think that is really very rare occasion when that might happen. So then, and once again, in terms of like one of our large initiatives with our rules is to once again to enforce the placement of buffers around water resources and wetlands to protect them. For the most part, we've looked at the wetlands within the City of Savage, within our watershed boundaries, and there are not many high-quality wetlands there to preserve. So with that, this letter also articulates, a process where we're asking that in the interim that we inform and provide the district the opportunity to review and respond to and provide comments on these applications. And let me just back up for a minute. There on your desk, there are some additional possible suggested revisions to this letter that we would like for your consideration. So I did receive, or maybe I'll have, let me just finish this off for 1 minute. So once again, the letter states some basic conditions that we would ask the city to work with us on in this interim condition until the city can update their ordinances. So with that, I did receive some potential edits from Manager Boyles, and Manager Boyles may want to present those to the rest of the managers for consideration.
you want me to present these to the rest of you? I think the idea of the first revision is to create a place and time for, in the course of subdivisions that take place, et cetera, so that we know when we are going to receive the comments. B was that including the conditions, we had the term whenever possible, and it was difficult to pin that down, and so we tried to pin it down a little more specifically. And then finally, at the very bottom, simply says, we are the approving party on this particular letter. With that, I'd move to approve an interim permitting approach with the City of Savage consistent with the staff prepared letter, and for the district administrator to sign and send the letter to the City of Savage for the city's signed acknowledgement of the interim permitting approach.
Motion made by Manager Boyles. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Manager Burnett. Any more discussions on this approach with the City of Savage? I think they did a lot of good work here. Looks like some very well done letter and a good approach, because very little, really, amount of area in Savage in our district is so small, and the one big one is the mine under a PUD, so we're well covered. Okay, with no more discussion, I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Okay, thank you, Joni. Now we're on item 4.6, and this is a pollinator and rain garden cost share project, and Emily is taking this, right?
Yep, I am. So the cost share program is directed by the 2023 cost share docket, and the current docket specifies a list of project types that are tier 1. Any other project type that is not on that list, even if it is an eligible project within the watershed district and within the budget that the watershed district has set for those types, has to come to the board for approval. So you've seen this type of approval at the last meeting, but that's why it's here again. This project includes a rain garden, pollinator. Neither of them are in those pre-approved project types. The rain garden would account for $250 of district funds, and the pollinator $570. This property was seen to be a high value at the SWCD because it's very visible on a road. Shoreline Boulevard might be the road name that you know, or Spring Lake Road. It's a dual named road. And staff recommends making a motion to approve the MIRIS pollinator and rain garden cost share project.
Okay, very good. It's a small little project in coordination with the SWD. Any motion approved? Or question?
I have a question.
Let's get a motion on the table, then you can ask the question. Anybody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Manager Boyle,
Second.
second by Manager Morkenberg. Any discussion? Manager Tofinelli.
I just want to make sure I know what I'm looking at here. Is this a new construction?
So the aerial photo is old. Now there is a house there. So yes, yep.
I honestly didn't know what I was looking at. So
Good question. And another clarifier, the map I meant to correct this says pocket planting. When it points to those, that is the technical pollinator, I was informed.
that I understand. I'm not sure on the signage of this. Does this mean I can drive up there and walk through this and look at this as a demonstrator? I see this as private property, so I'm confused on what that means to me exactly.
My instinct would be there's a sidewalk there, and so it would be visible from sidewalk, something like when you're walking down a neighborhood, it says this, my lawn is protecting the lake, or something like that. But that was the intent with the signage, that people passing by could see it, but not enter the property.
Do we have any restriction? You know, this year we have pollinators in a rain garden, and next year we don't have that paved over and it's someone's deck. This is on Spring Lake?
Correct.
Looking at the size, looking at $1 million, $1.2 million home, and someone wants us to pay for their planters and put it under a pollinated rain garden, which I'm just trying to understand. I've seen projects go 1 year and then the next they're gone. So trying to understand what's, you know, what we're getting out of this and what we're supplying, and if that's not going to be a vegetable garden next year.
Manager Toffanelli, I believe as part of the docket, there are commitments for, you know, length of period that this project would be in place. I do not know that right off the top of my head for this project, but I'd be happy to look that up and provide that information for you.
Yes, that I believe typically that's how it works, that you commit for a period of time, and you also commit part of your work to get this done. And I think the landowner also pays part of it. And the SWCD does come and check those gardens yearly, or actually several times yearly, and take pictures of it.
Correct. On this one, the way that the payment structure was set up is that this is 100% funded by the watershed district, given what these programs are.
Can you say that again? What percent? There's no money from the cooperator, or why is it 100%?
I don't know the details behind that, but I can ask. I know that the rate that we contributed is based on what is set out in the docket. So the district is sets specific rates for how much they're willing to contribute to rain gardens. So that's where the 250 number comes from, and the pollinator as well, cost per acre.
Yeah.
Per square
And
foot.
the reason it's coming before us for approval, because it's not, this type of project listed in our docket, correct?
It's not listed as Tier 1. It is an eligible project type.
Okay. So I guess we should look at this big, we're for picking up 100% of the cost, and we're going to see some runoff reduction, infiltration, and other benefits. Any other questions on this proposal? Looking to see. I think we had a motion. We haven't voted on it yet. I'm waiting to see. No more questions? Okay, all in favor of the motion to approve the Maris Pollinator and Rain Garden Project for cost share, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Hey,
Opposed? Christian, were you for or against?
For.
For. Motion carried 4-1. Okay, I think we are done with voting. So we're going to go on to a treasurer's report from Manager Morkenberg.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, board managers and staff. So our finances are in good condition, and we are at or below. If you look at the general fund, we have spent about 45%, and that's at the end of May. For the implementation fund, we have spent about 20%. We know that we will see more expenses coming through because we are working more with consultants this year, help with different projects. So that will be coming up, especially for on the fish management plan. The Stantec is looking at the Swamp Lake water quality feasibility. EOR is looking at the iron chloride treatment plant study, improvement study, and other things as well. But overall, it looks good. Our funds in the bank are 1.3 in the checking account and 1.2 in the fixed income. The fact that we have transferred our funds to 4M is a significant benefit. Previously, at our previous accounts, we got 0% interest, and now, so this year, we are somewhere between 4 and 5% interest. So actually earning some money while they have our money. So that's good. Other things that we implemented, the check payment with checks electronically, and so on. That's working well. We will be getting a new credit card that probably be functional in about 1 to 2 months or so.
That's right, 1 to 2 months.
Yep.
Manager Markeberg.
And by changing to the new credit card, we'll avoid things like late payment fees, which they just due to the cycle we had, we were being able to do that, and we'll avoid that in the future.
Right, and Manager Markeberg, the new purchasing card program that we will be entering in with, it's a state program, will also then give us rebates on all of our expenditures. So once again, we should see some more cost savings by moving to this new purchase card program.
Our restricted funds, we have 1.6 million in those, and right now we have available cash 122,000. In a few days, we should be receiving 960K payment from Scott County. So that should improve our balance, as you can see on the cash flow chart. We received all the payments for the prior lake channel, all the contributions, and our funds for that are replenished. And in our claims list, that all looks good as well. It's on page 32. No concerns there. So overall, it's our finances are in good condition. Any questions?
Any questions on the report? Well, the one thing I noticed is that I tried to get on the website and it crashed, the PMA 4M account. So,
yep.
And I don't know if it came back, but
yeah, they sent out a message today that they had a crash of their account.
Yeah.
Today, and so hopefully that's resolved. I haven't checked it since.
Yeah, hopefully too.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Good report. Now we have the consent agenda, in which we have meeting minutes of May 9th for the board workshop, meeting minutes May 9th for the board meeting, and meeting minutes from the April 27th, 2023 CAC meeting, as well as the claims list and visa expenditure summary, and a Scott County Public Works Storage Facility Conservation Easement, and the CAC Vice Chair appointment. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second. A motion made by Manager Tofinelli, seconded by Manager Boyle. There's any discussion? Christian?
Yes, I wonder if we could just hear a little bit about, I read the Scott County Public Works Storage Facility report, but so I'm not quite sure
Okay.
what exactly they're going to do, but
We have to
now.
pull that off the consent agenda.
Okay, it's fine. I don't need to ask a question then.
Well, we can do that.
Yep.
We can answer questions if you want. We just,
Why
is
don't we
it
do that?
acceptable to the motion maker and the second to
What's being removed?
It's acceptable to the motion maker.
Yeah, to remove item 6.5, the Scott County Conservation easement. Christian has some. Okay, then that's being removed. All in favor of the consent agenda, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Now we got to go back to item 6.5, the Scott County Public Works Storage Facility Conservation Easement. Manager Morkenberg, why don't you ask your questions? Or if you want a better
Yes.
explanation?
It says here, it required a vegetated buffer around the wetland and water corp for the long-term health function of these resources. So I wonder, Administrator Giese, if you could maybe explain just briefly what it is about.
Certainly, Manager Markable. This actually relates back to a permit that we issued back in 2019 when the Scott County was building a new storage facility at their facility out in the area right at 282 and 13. And in that development project, as they were developing that storage facility, it was identified that there was a wetland on the project. So district rules require that during a redevelopment or a development project, if there is wetland on that parcel, rules require that property owner establish a buffered, vegetated buffer around the water resource to protect it, and then to provide the district a conservation easement to that buffered land and the wetland in order to provide perpetual preservation and conservation of those resources. So it's been a little slow in coming. We eventually were able to secure this conservation easement associated with this permit. So the county has signed off on the conservation easement, and the Board of Managers accepts this conservation easement. I will sign it and then take it over to the Land Records Office at Scott County for recorded. So that means that should that property ever leave ownership and be resold, that easement will stay with the property in perpetuity for the preservation of that water resource.
And so that's this storage facility. Does it have any relationship to the toxic waste facility? Is that included in that?
Not to my knowledge.
No. Thank you.
Okay, so the item here is to make a motion to approve Scott County Public Works Storage Facility Conservation Easement for execution by the district administrator. Anybody want to make that motion? Manager?
Yes, motion.
Motion made and seconded? Second by Manager Burnett. Okay, motion made and seconded. Any more discussion? I don't see any. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Thank you. Okay, we're at 7.0, which is upcoming meeting and event schedule. We have our joint Board of Managers and CAC ferric chloride facility site tour. That's a biggie. On June 22nd at 3 p.m. And we need to meet here at Prior Lake City Hall. And then after that, we're going to have a joint Board of Managers and CAC meeting, our annual meeting, at 5 p.m. And it'll be here, but it's going to be in the Wagon Bridge Conference Room, which is downstairs. We have a Board of Managers workshop on Tuesday, July 11th at 4 p.m. And then we have a Board of Managers meeting Tuesday, July 11th at 6 p.m. And CAC would have a meeting on Thursday, July 27th at 6 p.m. in the Prior Lake City Hall Wagon Bridge Conference Room. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Manager Tofinelli. Second. Second by Manager Burnett. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Oh, that motion carried unanimously at 7:37 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Good night.